Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
When you talk about dental marketing today, especially new patient marketing, what's normally discussed? Well, the majority of the things that you're going to cover are normally going to be very internet heavy. You know, how your website is done, SEO, search engine optimization, Google pay-per-click, Facebook ads, implant funnels, how to get more online reviews. It's all about internet marketing. You still see some information out there about mail marketing or postcard marketing, but it's definitely not as popular, direct mail marketing, as it was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. Well, why is this? Well, number one, it's an older form of marketing, right? It's been around for quite some time. It was a thing when I entered the profession in the early 90s. People were sending out mail, postcards. It's also potentially very expensive, especially if it doesn't work. I mean, postage alone on a promotional piece, you're looking at least 30 cents, 40 cents, maybe the high 20 cents if you do it the right way. So, it can get very expensive very quickly. So if I'm looking at the idea, well, I can spend $1,000 to do some pay-per-click, or I can spend $5,000 to send out a bunch of postcards, I might go the $1,000 route because there's less risk associated with it. But the real question that should be asked about direct mail marketing is, does it still work? Is it still a useful tool in your practice marketing toolbox, or is it a relic from the past that we should just let die? And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. I want to talk about the pros and the cons of direct mail marketing and how to determine if this is something that you should adopt as one of the marketing strategies for your practice. And if you do, how to do it so that it actually works. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And, the first thing to know about any form, or just marketing in general, is that marketing evolves. And it doesn't just evolve. It's almost cyclic. It's cyclic. Sort of like if you like wearing ties, right? Like I wear ties for work. You'll see a cyclic aspect to tie shape and size, even design. You'll buy tie, the 2.5-inch ties are now in fashion. Then it's 3-inch ties. Then it's 3.5-inch ties, really big fat ties. Then it goes down to 1.5-inch ties. There's a cyclic aspect to fashion. There's a cyclic aspect to marketing. Because what happens? Well, let's say you were an early adopter for marketing postcards. You're sending marketing postcards out in 1992. Not a lot of folks were doing it back then. You're saying in those days, we had clients doing this. And I remember looking at a client's postcard, and this postcard used to get him 25 new patients a month. You would think this is this beautiful postcard. It was ugly. We used to joke about, he and I, how ugly the thing was. It was orange or hot pink, and it had this like navy blue, almost purple, ink on it. It was one color, just this navy blue or purple. And this postcard, have healthy teeth and gums, come in for a new patient special, used to get him 20 to 25 new patients, sometimes 35 new patients a month. And it was great. And postage back then was a lot more affordable. So this was a great form of marketing. Well, then what happened? Well, people in town see he's sending out this postcard. So now other people start sending out a postcard. Then more people start sending out a postcard. Then eventually, maybe it's cheaper to get them printed because more people are doing them, potentially. But then the effectiveness, the newness, the uniqueness of this postcard, this isn't the only postcard that prospective patients are getting in their mailbox anymore. So you'll see this with every form of marketing. It starts off, there's early adopters, then other people pile in, then it sort of hits a maximum where everybody's in, and the return isn't as good as it was early on, and then certain people start to drop off, and maybe the marketing comes back, or it stays, or it falls into disuse. Then it can be brought back again, which I'll explain here in a little bit. I mean, this has happened with everything. In the early days of the internet, and this is when websites were not the greatest, right? Email marketing was a thing. You probably remember this. You would get emails advertising this or that. Well, nobody was really email marketing. So when you got one of those, because the only emails you would get are from, your friends or your business coworkers, right? Well, now you're getting, or clients, now you're getting emails about a promotional item and nobody else is sending them to you. Well, those tended to work better than, 5 years, 6 years down the road when everybody's doing email marketing. And it got so bad, that you have companies like Google with Gmail where they created a promotions tab because everybody's getting so many emails with email marketing that they just don't have time to go through them, and their inbox has 26,000 emails in it because they just don't clean their inbox every day because they don't have the time. So in a lot of cases, if you're doing bulk email marketing, In many cases, the effectiveness, let's say, compared to, let's say, 15 years ago, not 50 years ago, 15 years ago is not near as good. Because in a lot of cases, if the person you're mailing to has Gmail, if it's a promotional email, it's ending up in their promotions box. They may or may not see it, that little promotions tab. You have the same thing in Outlook. You have a focused inbox, and I don't know what the other inbox is called, general or unfocused. Maybe they're not looking at those because the focused inbox is the important emails, right? So this is what happens with every form. Google pay-per-click was the same way. Initially it was cheap, then it became more expensive. We had, just as an aside, we adopted Facebook marketing very early on. We were Facebook marketing in 2000, I think it was 12 or 13. That's when we started. So really early. Okay. So at the time, it was very easy to do and very easy to use because Facebook hadn't, made it to where it was like a main source of their revenue at that point, I guess. So you could know very little and put together Facebook ads. And so we did it for us here at MGE. It worked great. And then, I thought, my marketing director and I were talking. I thought, I wonder how this would work for clients. So this is 2013. So just for funsies, we grabbed a client and said, hey, we would like to do some Facebook marketing for you. You'd have to pay for the ads, of course, but we just want to try it, see what you think. And this office did a lot of Lumineers and Invisalign and things like this. So we said, sure, let's try it. Well, to give you an idea of the effectiveness, he was spending $1,400 a month. We did the ads for free, right? He spent $1,400 a month, and he was getting on the average 20 new patients a month. He averaged 20 new patients a month, and these patients were all coming in for Lumineers and Invisalign. So think about that for a second. If you could spend $1,400 for 20 new patients, that's $70 a new patient. And it's not just a new patient coming in for, a night guard. This is a new patient coming in for Invisalign or Lumineers. This worked great. So then, all right, what happens? Eventually, more and more people see dentists are advertising on Facebook. So you have agencies that start advertising to dentists to do it, and other doctors see it. They want to be on there too. Then you end up with a lot of ads. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't advertise on there or you stop advertising on there. It just means you have to be a little bit more crafty to make sure your ads actually get seen. But it definitely starts to dilute the effectiveness as opposed to being, first to market or the early adopter. So this tells you with marketing, there's kind of two things you want to do because it evolves. There's going to be things that you do which are sort of your steady Eddie marketing things. You're always doing pay-per-click. You're keeping your SEO in good shape. You're always doing you're making sure your website is proper and reflects what's actually going on in your office. Maybe you're sending out some kind of mail, and then you're always keeping your eye open for newer opportunities. Maybe you were an early adopter of Instagram marketing, right? There's a lot of dentists on TikTok now. I know quite a few who get a lot of new patients from TikTok, right? Well, eventually TikTok will start to get saturated. So you end up with all these different marketing channels. They start to get saturated. Their effectiveness maybe isn't quite as good as it was before. Maybe you can keep it that way if you're really smart with how you market. But then, eventually gets saturated. So people start to drop out of it. And then if enough time goes by and the channel still exists, it eventually falls into a degree of disuse. And the funny thing about that, like with direct mail marketing, is that's happened to a degree of direct mail. Not a lot of people do direct mail anymore. I can tell you just as a consumer, I don't see as many postcards for dentists in my mailbox as I used to see 10 years ago. Okay. So, but what that tells you is if it's falling into disuse, but people are still receiving it, potentially it's not a bad thing to do. It becomes popular, then it loses popularity. Well, you can always, bring it back. There's always a way to bring it back. So, should you do direct mail in your practice? Should you be doing some form of direct mail marketing? And if you should, what should you be sending out? Well, it really depends on a few things. It depends on where your office is located, what you plan to send out, if you can fund it so it stays consistent, and if you're set up to make it work. We talk about this a lot in the MGE New Patient Workshop. We do a lot on internet marketing and reviews and things like that in that workshop as well, but we do discuss direct mail marketing as well. If you want to know more about the New Patient Workshop, we'll put a link on the episode webpage. So let's say you're looking at your office and you're thinking, okay, I'm doing all these other marketing channels. I got my SEO in good shape. I got a good website that really works. I'm doing all these things I'm supposed to do. Should I do direct mail? Can I get more new patients from direct mail? Well, number one, it depends on where your office is. If I were in a downtown area where a lot of my patients were coming from other offices or businesses in the area, I probably would not do direct mail marketing. I'm a high rise, let's say in Manhattan, and there's not a lot of folks who live around my office, and most of the people who come to my office work near my office. I may not do direct mail. Because the idea is my direct mail has to get in front of somebody who's potentially a patient in my practice or could become a patient. So if I have a suburban practice, which is where most offices are, or, then I'm probably going to do direct mail because, within a 5 or 10 mile radius, there's going to be a lot of potential patients. So if you're in a really rural area where there's a local newspaper, like a newspaper for your little town that everybody actually reads, you could even advertise in the newspaper at that point. You could put a newspaper insert in there because people actually read the thing. The thing to keep in mind is you want to be able to put this in front of people who could potentially become a patient. If you're in a downtown area, that might be tough. Whereas if you're in a suburban area or, just kind of a, regular small town, that might be easier, right? So then the next question is, if you're going to send out direct mail, new patient marketing, what should you send out? So there's a few things to consider here. This could be a postcard. It could be a flyer. You could do a 6x9 postcard, 6 inches by 9 inches. You could do a small postcard. I've seen people get inventive with this where they do a really big one. I don't know that it necessarily makes a difference. This is something you can experiment with. You could even take an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper, a regular letter size paper, and can fold 3 times like a tri-fold mailer. The type of thing you send out is not that critical, but the key is you don't want to spend a ton of money on it. And this is where I see people make their first mistake. So you go, okay, this postcard is going to represent my office. So it has to be, 100% high class, high tech. That's going to get you in trouble because if I send out 10,000 postcards, think about this for a second. Let's say I send out 10,000 postcards and I get this enormously off the chain response rate. 200 people respond, which probably won't happen, okay? I'll get into what the actual response rate with a postcard here is a little bit later. Let's say 200 people respond. So 10,000 postcards for 200 new patients. That's great. That's amazing, right? That still means 9,800 postcards ended up in the garbage. So you can make a very tasteful, nice looking postcard without spending a lot of money, especially today with the access we have to printing and design that we have that we didn't have 10, 15, 20 years ago with on-demand printing and things like this. So the key is you don't want to go completely nuts with the quality to the point where you're spending, a dollar a card or something like this, or it's gold embossed, or you don't want to go crazy with this. You want to make it look nice. You want it to reflect your practice, but you want to keep the costs reasonable because most of these are going to end up in the recycle bin, hopefully, or the trash. All right. So that's the first mistake I see people made. Then the next thing is, what are you going to put on this postcard? I mean, this could be a whole episode in and of itself, but definitely you're going to want to have before and after photos. You're going to want to make sure your postcard art is nice and pleasant to look at. You're going to want to make sure that it has some form of a new patient offer. I know some people go back and forth on this. Do I want to offer some type of a discounted something? Is that going to make people think weirdly about my practice? Absolutely not. If you have no kind of an offer, then there's really no reason for a person to respond. If I get a postcard from you and it's, hi, I'm a dentist in the area, give me a call. I don't really have a reason to give you a call unless I feel like giving you a call. This is mixed into what we call the call to action. You may have heard this before in marketing lingo. It's the CTA. So this might be, a new patient special for a cleaning exam and a full mouth x-ray. Or it might be, you might be advertising a couple different things. You might have an exam and x-rays, a free consultation, or some type of special with relation to, maybe they're missing teeth and for implants, they're going to get a free cone beam, or you're going to do a cone beam and a this and a that for $110. Whatever this offer might be really doesn't matter, right? You want to make sure that the offer is good, but you want to have some reason to induce the person to call and then tell them to call now to make an appointment. And usually that's when you see postcards work out poorly. It's, bad artwork, no before and afters. There's no real call to action of any kind, and there's no offer. And if you get the idea that having an offer is bad, let me ask you a question. Have you ever bought anything because it was on sale? Be honest for a second. You heard it was on sale. Did that make you want to buy it? Maybe you wanted to buy it anyway, but then the fact that it was on sale induced you to act, which is the only reason that you put an offer in there. And, the other counter argument I would make if you have somebody say, well, I don't want to discount my cleaning exam and x-rays, right? As an example, let's say you do a new patient special where your cleaning exam and x-rays, let's say, normally cost about $300, right? And the pro fee is $110. So let's say you do a new patient special, you're going to do a cleaning exam and x-rays for $110. All right. So you're giving away over almost $200. So you go, well, I don't want to do that. I want to lower my fees, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you take PPOs, you're doing that every time you see a patient. This you're only doing the first time you see them. Okay. It's a loss leader, right? You've heard that term before where you're spending a little bit of money to attract somebody with the idea that they're going to stick with your business. All right. So then let's say you come up with a postcard idea, and there's a couple different ways you can do this. Okay. You could print a lot of the same postcard that you're going to mail multiple times. You could print, there's not going to be that many differences in a 6x9 postcard, right? But you could have maybe a little bit of different artwork on each one so it looks a little bit different, right? You could do this. I'm more of a fan of that. I try not to send the exact same thing out over and over and over again, because one thing I've realized with marketing over the years too is that marketing can get tired, right? And we'll get into how you're going to mail it here in a second. But if I'm sending the exact same thing out over and over and over again, eventually someone may tune it out. If I have some slight variation of it, the second or third time they're receiving it or the fourth time they're receiving it, it at least keeps them still interested. Maybe there's something I did different with this card that attracts their attention, whereas last time it didn't. Okay, so I'm more of a fan of doing that. So then let's say I'm doing a postcard or a flyer of some kind. Who would I send it to? And how much would I send out? This is another area where I see mistakes get made. You know, in the old days, before we had things like every door direct mail with the U.S. Post Office, where you can pick a route and everybody on that route gets your card, right? We used to have clients buy mailing lists, and they would buy a mailing list of, maybe people in their area who make over a certain amount of money, or sometimes they wanted homeowners, or it depended on the criteria that they were looking for. For example, if I were going to market specifically, let's say for implants, I'm probably not going to want to market to people under the age of 35 or 40. Because most of those folks aren't going to be missing any teeth unless they're hockey players or something. So I'm going to probably want to stick with people over 40 if I'm marketing implants, right? And you can pull mailing lists for things like this, right? And obviously there'd be income criteria there too. Nowadays, you have this every door direct mail where you literally look, and you can play with this. Go to the U.S. Post Office if you're in the United States, and there may be something similar to this in Canada or in the EU. And you can pull up, basically you look at a map of a zip code and you pick the different routes, because every mail carrier has a route that they drop things on, okay? And basically you're looking at, okay, there are 875 people on this route, so they're going to distribute 875 of your postcards. EDDM, every door direct mail. This is substantially cheaper than mailing it out via first class mail or bulk mail. Bulk mail is cheaper than first class mail. First class mail is like, what you'd send a letter with, right? That gets prohibitively expensive, whereas EDDM is pretty good. And if you go to a neighborhood and you like the neighborhood, you just basically are blanketing the whole neighborhood. All right. So, you pull your list, you put it together. And the key is you're going to want to send this out in an adequate quantity, and you're going to want to send it out consistently. So the correct quantity and consistently. Both of these things are critical to making this work. So what kind of numbers are we talking about? I wouldn't tell somebody to postcard market if they were not willing to send out at least 5,000 cards a month. 10,000 would be better. You can do more than 10,000 too. I mean, again, it really depends where you are, right? But you could just you look at these little routes in your area, or you can pull a mailing list from around your office, and within a couple mile radius, there might be, 50,000 prospective patients. We'll pick the first 10,000 that you want to mail to. But how are we going to mail to these folks? There's a basic concept in marketing, this idea of multiple contacts or multiple touches. Right? So let's say you're marketing and you have a billboard and you have a big sign, you're doing postcards and you're doing Facebook ads in my area. So I see you on Facebook, I see your billboard, and now I get your postcard in the mail. I've had 3 contacts with you. That may spur a response. There's been enough contact where I go, okay, I gotta call these folks, especially if I have some kind of a dental problem. And this is where the rest of your marketing all works synergistically, right? They all work together. If you've got good SEO, you've got a good website, you have good reviews, and you are doing pay-per-click and Facebook and whatever, your postcard marketing will actually become less expensive because there's more recognition. I saw you on Facebook, now I see your postcard. I'm more likely to respond at that point because you're hitting me on multiple channels, which is why, so you want to make sure this all works. And think about it, this is where you want to also have the ability to think like a consumer. A lot of us don't do that, especially when you're making your postcard. Think like a consumer. Don't think like yourself. We're not looking at attracting more dentists as new patients. You're looking at attracting more new patients. So think with what the consumer is going to want to see. I know that's sometimes difficult because you may not like it. That happens to me. We have a joke about it. Like if I make a marketing piece and I don't like it, it's going to work, because it's not for me, folks. It's for the consumer, right? I'm not my consumer. You're not your consumer. So when you make this thing or you're going to do this thing, you want to be consistent is what we're talking about. So let's say I pick a couple of routes I want to mail to around my office and I've got 10,000 names, right? Well, I'm not going to send 10,000 postcards out the first month, then send them nothing the next month and and then send it to another 10,000 people and then to another 10,000 people the following month. What I'm probably going to do is hit these folks every month for a few months. It might be with the same postcard. It might be with a slightly different postcard because I want to create this repetition. Remember, I've had clients tell me they've had patients walk into the office of the postcard saying, I got this thing for the third time. I figured I'd better call and show up. Literally. Okay? Because it does sometimes take this continuous communication before the person finally responds. But if I'm sending out 10,000 postcards, I could break them into 2,500 a week, do it over the course of a month. That might be nice, especially if you're getting a consistent response. It's not like this overwhelming response the first week of the month and then nothing the rest. Or I could send 10,000 out per month and nothing out to the beginning of the next month. Either way is fine. Whatever's easier. I'm a bigger fan of consistency doing it weekly. That's just me. You don't have to do that. But so, I go, okay, here's my 10,000. I'm sending to this group of 10,000 at the beginning of January. Good. I'm sending that same group again a postcard at the beginning of February. I'm sending them that same group again a postcard at the beginning of March. Boom, boom, boom. Maybe even in April. Now, is it the same postcard? Possibly. Maybe a slight variation as I was talking about earlier. And a couple considerations on this. Number one, and I mentioned this earlier, what type of a response do you think you're going to get from postcard marketing to new patients, not patients of record, okay? You're going to get a better response from your patients of record because they know you. But to new patients, prospective patients, a good response, just so you know, is 0.25%, 0.25%. That's a good response. And keep in mind, a response is not a new patient. Keep that in mind. So if I send out 10,000 postcards, I am going to get 25 phone calls on average. All right, that's the first thing to know. Some people think, well, I'm going to get 2% or 3% or 4%. No, you're not. You're going to get an average of 0.25% with a decent postcard. So I get 25 phone calls off these 10,000 postcards that I've sent out. So there's a couple things to think with here. I'm going to get into how those phone calls are handled in a second. But if I send a postcard out and let's say I get no phone calls, well, that's bad. All right. And I've done this before. I'm not saying you have to do this, right? This doesn't mean that I wouldn't mail market, but I just want you to think with this. If I'm sending a postcard out, the biggest expense when I send out a piece of mail is usually not the printing, especially with a postcard, right? The biggest expense is the postage. So it's not going to cost me more till I mail this thing out. So let's say I send out a postcard, it gets me no response. I send it again, it gets me no response. This postcard is obviously a dud, okay? It's not going to work. So would I send it out again? Probably not. I've thrown marketing away because it just wasn't. Now, luckily, I've had to do this very infrequently in my career or I wouldn't have worked out, right? But I've thrown marketing away because it was going to cost me more to mail out this, thing that wasn't working than to just go back to the drawing board, print something new that was going to work. This is just something to keep in mind. It should be getting you some response, okay? But again, if I want 25 phone calls, I got to send out, 10,000 cards. All right. So if I'm sending out, 10,000 cards and I get 25 phone calls, now it comes down to how good am I or is my office or my receptionist at converting these calls? And this is a big deal because this can make or break your marketing. A response is not a new patient. So I've sent out my 10,000 cards. I have 25 phone calls. Let's say my receptionist is dynamite. They are really good and they convert 80% of these calls to a new patient. So they got 25 calls. They converted 80%. That's 20 new patients. Now the average first year revenue, and I'm talking average, it could be a lot better than this, folks, for a patient in a dental practice in the United States is about $1,200 to $1,500. Okay, that's the average first year revenue. So if I spent, let's say for 10,000 cards, let's say I spent $5,000. That might be a little expensive. Let's say I spent $5,000 and I got 25 calls and we converted 20 of these new patients that came into the practice, and the average first year revenue is, let's say, $1,500. That means we made $30,000 for spending $5. And also, if we're doing a good job at retaining these patients, well, then, there's going to be revenue year after year after year. This was a successful marketing campaign. I spent $5,000 to make 30, possibly more. All right. That's a 6-to-1 return on investment. That's excellent. But now, let's say my receptionist isn't as on the ball, and out of these 25 phone calls only converts the national average, which is about 23%, which would be about 6 new patients. Well, now that 6 new patients is about a $9,000 return. So I spent $5,000 to make $9,000. This isn't even, it's a less than 50% return on investment. That's not so good. Or it could be even worse, in which case you start to think that postcard marketing is no good, which brings me to this last point. Are you set up to actually be successful? And you could apply this to any marketing. And this is where I would say, 30 to 40% of the time, marketing doesn't work, especially in a dental practice. I've seen people do implant funnels, right? And they get all these forms, because usually an implant funnel is going to filter out anybody that doesn't meet the criteria that you've set, right? So when you get a form, that's somebody who's run through some degree of pre-qualification before you're actually reaching out to them. Well, if you don't reach out to them, or you take 3-4 days before you respond, or the person that you have reaching out isn't very good, well, then you're not going to get any conversions, in which case you're going to think, well, this implant funnel stinks. And again, people have a tendency to want to justify their ineffectiveness, which I understand. I'm not saying this is like a bad human trait, but this is generally what happens. So then, you try to find out, well, what went wrong? Well, these patients weren't really serious about getting implants and so on. You're going to hear all kinds of explanations because nobody wants to say, well, I just did a really bad job making this call and I don't know what I'm doing and I blew it. Nobody wants to say that. But that's effectively what happens in a lot of cases, okay? So your point of contact, whoever's answering the phone or reaching out, if you're getting form responses as new patient responses, that point of contact is probably that's 50% of your marketing, folks. And I've made episodes about this. Matter of fact, the second episode we did on this podcast was about the receptionist. I think I made 2 others. I didn't note it down before I came up here to record. But I've gone over it before. I'll just say it again real briefly. The national average is 23% conversion. That was a study of 10,000 phone calls. So that's 100 calls for 23 new patients. That's horrible. So you want your receptionist to live in that 70 to 80% range of conversion. That's where you want them to live. So how do you know if they're doing a good job? Like, how do you know if it's the postcard or the marketing or your receptionist? Well, you have to have a few controls in place or you're never going to know. And it's going to all be opinion. Now, if you know me, you know that I have a pet peeve about this. If I ask somebody, how's this working? Oh, lots of people think it's great. Oh, tons of people are responding. Tons and lots are not numbers. Those aren't statistics. And it doesn't mean that I'm this, cold, brutal number watcher. That isn't the thing. I want to know if something's actually effective. So if I do a marketing campaign, I'm going to want to know, okay, how many people actually responded? So I need to be able to track that somehow. So this is where I'm going to give you a few downloads. I'm actually going to give you 3 that you can download to use these in your practice. The first thing you're going to want to use is a call log. Now, this is where basically any new patient call coming in is tracked for, their name, their number, where they responded from. That's super critical. And let's say you're using 3 variations of the same postcard. Well, you're going to want to give each postcard a little code that the patient can tell whoever's answering the phone, or at least give you some data. Oh, the postcard's purple, or the postcard's pink, or the postcard has a picture of a lady on the front. Something so that it has a unique identifier so you can tell if this thing is actually working. And the call log has to be kept. It is non-optional. Otherwise, you cannot track if your marketing is working, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and don't depend on phone numbers. Even if your postcard has a unique phone number, are you going to sit there and listen to each call to see if it was actually a new patient? Because someone else could have gotten the phone number somehow. Might be a patient of record who responded to it last time, right? But you want to make sure that this thing is properly kept. And there are going to be all kinds of excuses possibly why it can't be kept. None of them are valid. It has to be kept. It's part of the job. Number 1, non-negotiable. Second thing is your receptionist has to know what to say, how to handle various questions if the person asks about insurance or is price shopping, this, that, the other. I'm going to give you a download for a new patient scripts ebook, like how to handle incoming calls with the most common type questions a receptionist gets. You can get it on the episode webpage. This really lays out, how to handle different types of inquiries. And if you have questions about this stuff, not to overwhelm you with downloads, we do a free mystery call service. I'll put a link to that as well, where we'll call your office and grade your receptionist for you. And keep in mind, it's not that if they're not converting well, it's not that your receptionist is necessarily bad. They may just not have a really good idea of what it is they're supposed to be doing. They may think that they're, the office bouncer or something like this, or they just don't know. They don't know exactly how to achieve the objective. It's not due to lack of willingness. It's due to lack of knowledge, due to lack of training. Okay. So I'll give you those 2 downloads on the episode webpage. You could also do some training with your receptionist, which I highly recommend. We have some on DDS Success, a whole course on phone skills or online platform. We'll put the link to that as well. That's my shameless plug of the episode, folks. But you're going to want to really invest some time and effort into your receptionist, whoever's talking to these patients. This could, a little bit of training, which really costs you nothing but time, can have a huge impact on your business. It's hard to fathom how big the impact could be. For example, let's go back to our postcard example. You got 25 responses. Well, you do some training with your receptionist who's only converting about 5 of those, and now they're converting 15. That's 10 extra new patients a month. Just in first year revenue alone, that's an additional $15,000. You multiply that by every month, that's $180,000 a year. Just from doing a little bit of training. And then you want to make sure your training's sticking, so you probably have some type of a, service or that you use to record phone calls. Listen to those phone calls. See how they're doing. Train them. It can make a huge impact on your business, because I want that 70, 80% conversion rate. So those are the issues with direct mail. Those are the pros and cons. Those are, whether you should do it or not, that would be my suggestion. And if you're going to do it, you want to do it right. Otherwise, it's just going to be a waste of time and effort, right? And it can definitely be a nice add to your practice, especially if you're doing other kinds of marketing, which will actually lower the cost for you in the long run. One last thing I want to bring up, because this is something people don't think with. So, you're marketing for new patients, and let's say you get a good amount. Let's say you get 40 a month, right? So you're getting almost 500 new patients per year. Well, that's great. But do you do any marketing to your patients of record? You might think, well, I don't have to market to my patients of record because they're already my patients. Well, it's absolutely not true. If you take a look, well, I'm not saying they're not your patients, but you absolutely should be marketing to your patients of record. Every other business does. If you've bought from stores, they still send you marketing, catalogs, emails, etc. You should be doing the same thing with your patients of record. And if you want to keep it simple, there's a lot of different things you can do with this, because number one, if you market to them regularly, it's going to help increase your retention. It's going to help them, show up more regularly for their checkups and things of that nature. It will also keep you in their mind for referrals and things of that nature. But if you want to do your bare bones basic, you can send out emails and you can do stuff on your social media page as well. But here's what I'd suggest. If you want to market to your patients of record, what would be sort of like, to me, the bare minimum? The irreducible minimum would be some type of a quarterly newsletter. And I would send that newsletter out by mail. Like snail mail, like real mail. You can send an email version too if you want, but very rarely do people, at least in my experience, read I mean, they sometimes do. You might post it on your blog as well. You could do that too, an email, you post it on your blog, but send out a snail mail newsletter. Send it out quarterly. It could be really simple. It doesn't have to be some canned thing that you buy from a marketing company. I actually don't like those. I like the ones that you make yourself. It could be just a big 11 by 17 piece of paper, folded down twice, that you mail out, right? And you mail it to your patients of record. It could be simple. Small article, maybe on, it could be something dentally related, how keeping your teeth improves your overall health and quality of life, different dental type subjects, right? It could be something else, that you might find interesting that you want to share with your patients. It could be news about the practice. We just got a new hygienist. Here's Dr. Smith, our new associate. Jane just had a baby. Whatever you want to say about the practice family, so to speak, to your patient family. Right? Any new procedures that you're offering in the practice. Now you're doing implants. Now you're doing all-on-4s. Maybe you're offering some type of sleep apnea. You can throw that in there. And you might have some type of an offer for your patients of record. Come back for, if you haven't had a cleaning in over a year, come back for a cleaning. Or it could be, get a discount on bleaching. Something to keep people active and aware and in touch. I mean, it's a lot easier today with the internet, but it used to be if someone moved and had a forwarding order on their mail. Let's say you moved. That forwarding order it only lasts for 6 months, still only lasts for 6 months. If I move and I'm your patient and you send me a piece of mail, it'll come back saying that I have a forwarding order to my new address and you should change my address in your system. Well, after 6 months, you would no longer get that. It'll just come back return to sender. Okay, now with the internet now, you can search and find new addresses, right? So if I've moved, it's a lot easier. But if you're doing a regular newsletter once a quarter, you're going to pick up on any moving patients before they have to tell you or before you have to go searching for them online. It's a good way also to keep your mailing list clean. And again, I preferred these homemade to prefab, something that you make on your own. You can have a designer put it together. It doesn't have to be amazing, but you should be marketing to your patients of record regularly. Should be consistent. Every quarter, this newsletter goes out. All right, so that hits on what I wanted to cover in this episode. So if you look at the question, is direct mail marketing dead? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I think more people have moved out of the space over the last 10 years, which has created some opportunity if you want to jump back into it. It's useful if you're in the right situation and you do it right. I hope this helps. I put the links to everything I talked about in the episode on the episode webpage. And if you have any questions, you can contact us at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.